Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight we're going to be talking about authenticity versus the fakery of what is going on around us. There can be no talk of appropriate right action when this mechanism is in place. Of course, there are many factors which govern people. Let's first have a look at the true meaning of authenticity. Authenticity is the quality of being genuine or real, the state of something being authentic, legitimate, and of course true. Well, most of what is presented as fact in pictures on TV and words in publications has little or no authenticity. That is as far as the mass media is concerned, whether it's the mainstream so-called legacy media or the so-called alternative media. Both give fake narratives. It is corporate speak from agents of corporations. So go up a level and religion also becomes slogans, as we can see at the moment. It enables what are called the two lies. There is not much authenticity. In fact, the current events in the UK indicate this very clearly. These events will underpin the content of this particular show. What happens though when authenticity is lost? Well, fakery is imposed and infiltration is accepted. Belief becomes sound bites. The subconscious, when subjected to this, will be triggered when necessary. The conscious actions come from unconscious implanted propaganda. Not many escape this, and most are victims, as can be seen currently. And of course, this will happen in future events. So learning from it and learning about it and what authenticity really is, obviously, is paramount. The corporations which supply the means of subconscious, easily triggered engagement in the fake news media and its publications are really the main steering process. There can be no talk of appropriate right action when this mechanism is in place. There cannot be any talk of being authentic when absorbed into the marketplace. And the marketplace is where concepts and ideas compete for popularity. That's what we're talking about here. It doesn't matter whether you think it's about news. It's all propaganda, and it all comes from the marketplace. It all comes from corporations. It leads to financial gains through aligning with popular beliefs. So, of course, this is why we have these YouTube channels which get hundreds of thousands of hits but appear to be going against the mainstream narrative. They are not going against the mainstream narrative. They're actually helping it. They're enabling it by not addressing the real issue, by addressing one of the two lies. Well, let's go into what popular beliefs are. They are beliefs that align themselves with what is perceived to be popular. And we've all heard the word populism being used as well. And populism is a way of the fake media saying that people are cottoning on to what is actually happening, and there is a reaction to it, an honest reaction, and that is called populism, and that is what they want to get rid of by their own definition and by their own publications. More importantly though, people align with what is being corporately imposed on the marketplace. Corporations are a major factor in the governance of people. So those who respond to what appears popular in the marketplace are being overtly governed by corporations. Therefore, anything perceived as popular is aligning with that which is corporate governance, and corporate governance is what is being imposed. Therefore, if one wants to be able to think and act with perception and discrimination in all matters, one must remove all thought which is implanted by corporations. Anything that one sees easily and often and is being publicised is there for the reason of absorption of energy and response. Collective response to something which has been pre-approved for you to be steered by. Why are certain products, ideas and commentaries approved? Well, because they steer the public to either buy the product or align with the promoted information. Remember, information is a product. It's being sold to you for money. The promoted information, therefore, is from an elite imposed power structure. Many people believe they think for themselves. yet they repeat all their ideas from what they have seen or heard. And we can see this recently with the sound bites that come out of people's mouths and the way they are just being steered into the most obvious reactions, which of course are to their detriment. But corporations are profit orientated, of course, and this is called economic growth. The only thing that is growing is perceived financial returns, which must constantly increase. This is unstable and is the opposite of what is called stability. Well, stability, of course, would bring reflection and a possibility for growth and more knowledge. This is why there cannot be stability. So this is something we have to impose ourselves and through ourselves. And the only way to do this is to have stable information and stable output of information. Those who parasite in this way know very little, and it is essential to keep the market free of lofty or elevated concepts, of course, which is what they do. This only partially, though, explains the dumbing down process that is happening today. The public are willingly participating in their own dumbing down. One of the reasons is television and internet shows which drive the two lies. Anything that drives the two lies, of course, is setting off one against another. It's perpetuating the big lie. Therefore, by being forced into one of the lies, you're being mentally decoupled from reality. We know what the two lies are: organised religion versus atheism. Two lies which never get to the central issue. We've got the far left and the far right. Two lies. This is nothing to do how governance is actually occurring at the present time. It's so the public are put between two lies so they don't get to the solution. There are countless debates on the two lies, of course: communism versus capitalism, Labour versus Tory, free market and privatisation. We hear these useful idiots who are on the BBC all the time being put into these documentary type situations which are recorded, where they debate endlessly about the two lies. And of course, this is just a complete and utter waste of time. None of these go anywhere near the issues of how things actually work. And this gives rise to endless internet debates and the choose your side rhetoric, which is what we see all the time. And those giving out this pointless actually and endless conceptual division are promoted. They become what is known as media personalities. And we can see this in the fake alternative media and the fake mainstream media. There was no such thing, of course, before TV and the internet. People would still, of course, be promoted by government, but even they would have to have some basic knowledge. This is, of course, no longer the case. Hence the talking heads trying to popularise themselves, essentially just there for the sake of it. Experts in one thing only: self-publicity through sound bites and advertising revenue. The cult of absolutely nothing. Well, this drives down intellect, of course, and ideas in favour of following simple and mostly stupid causes. And, of course, ideas which change like the fashion victims that perpetuate them. Well, authenticity, therefore, is nowhere to be seen. It has to be sought out. This takes effort, of course, and no one likes effort, as it takes consideration and thought and discipline. The most appealing gatekeepers and BS wafflers are, of course, the most popular, and they are, of course, the most appalling, because the public are victims of corporate entities which dictate who and what they see. And that is very, very important. If you're seeing something that's got hundreds of thousands of hits, or it keeps appearing in your feed, there's definitely something wrong. And much of what is seen, of course, is opinion based on one of the two lies. The public are made to choose one of the lies, therefore literally can never see the wood for the trees. The left versus the right, of course, is the most popular at the moment. There has been a term coined by agents of propaganda corporations called the far right. A now meaningless term includes all who question issues which are presented to them daily, such as immigration and crime, the things that are being perpetuated. And of course, these events which are happening, which are real, but are being used to steer the public into exactly where they want the public to go. So on a management basis, this term far right actually also refers to people who have no strategy or insight, unfortunately. What was called the far right in the past did have organisations which were then infiltrated and of course neutralised. The lack of direction or cause is clear when people gather in places for no particular purpose other than being steered into a choose your side slogan contest with those who support the other lie of the left, of course, and its fake steering groups such as Antifa or Black Bloc, which are both state-backed propaganda and attack dog outlets. So both the left and right are controlled by the state apparatus, the two lies. Well, it's therefore important at this stage for a group or organisation to identify itself. Otherwise, an identity will be imposed upon it. By identify itself, I don't mean publicly with a name. I mean to have a clear identity of who they are, what their aim is, and who they are letting into that group. Organisations which are quoted in the corporate media, such as Hope Not Hate, use only memes and short descriptions. And this is how it all works. They are quoted by all the corporate media outlets. So what we've just heard from Hope Not Hate is the sight of demonstrators attacking a hotel in the belief it is housing migrants is almost incomprehensible, says Nick Lowles, the managing director of Hope Not Hate. He said he was lost for words to describe scenes at a Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham. Well, he shouldn't be lost for words because his organisation is part of this steering process. He says the fact that hundreds of people have targeted a hotel that is housing migrants, it is almost incomprehensible. They knew that people were in that hotel and they consciously tried to set fire to it. Well, I wouldn't go that far. There was police there and there seemed to be some rough attempts to do this. And we have to remember, of course, that agent provocateurs are planted within all of these groups. Nobody is really allowed to do this. Remember, after the riots in 2011, it spread from Tottenham in North London all over the country, and that was to bring in another level of policing. When I actually followed some of these police vans away from Tottenham, they were going up the A10 towards Hertford, and they stopped off at another place, a shopping centre, where hundreds of youths had been told to gather for no reason whatsoever. However, at the back of this place, there were army-type police vehicles ready to be rolled out, and at the end of those 2011 protests, the BBC gave you a glimpse of these armoured vehicles, which are all there. We just haven't seen them so far yet. They've been there since 2011. He says, this is get back to Nick Lowles now, communities are so scared we have to rebuild. Well, I think these organisations are part of the dismantling process. It's up to people to rebuild. Well, those who use this organisation as a propaganda outlet have created the situation, of course, by implanting the necessary subconscious information to trigger these knee-jerk responses which are happening. Lowles said agitators have been oversimplifying stories to whip up hate, which is exactly what these organisations do, as they are, of course, in league with funded protest attack dogs like Antifa. They use the term fascists and Nazis regularly to describe those gathering who, in the main, have nothing to do except shout some slogans. These people are not far right and certainly not fascists or Nazis. The Nazis ended after World War II. There are, of course, a few neo-Nazi groups still existing in Ukraine who are being funded by the British. As for fascists, it's a long time since Cable Street and the Black Shirts, of course, and the continental leaders of fascism are also long gone. Redundant terms, reduced to meaninglessness, but useful, of course, to manipulators and the global predictors. I'm going to be back after a very short break. Welcome back to Windows on the World. That was, of course, from the soundtrack of the Heretics of London, the Smithfield Martyrs, which you can purchase and help us out. It's on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. And we were talking just before the break about redundant terms, where they're using terms like fascist and Nazi and far right. These terms have been stripped of their meaning, reduced to meaninglessness, but of course are useful to manipulators and the global predictors of what is going on. And of course the people who are on the streets have been saying, we want our country back and England till we die, or England till I die. So those gathering and saying this obviously do not plan to emigrate, so why aren't they getting organised? With this in mind, surely there should be some thought going into what's going on. Well, of course, the movements they are offered are set up for them and destroyed when necessary. Still being led like this is not an option for anyone who wants to achieve anything, of course. This strategy to demonise otherwise legitimate views has never been used more than now, and more importantly, has never been so obvious a distraction. Energy is of course wasted by attending these unfocused assemblies. Seen this before, and for a very long time. It's been going on ever since I can remember. The lack of aims and strategies has never, though, been so apparent. One self-promoting and self-appointed waffler on YouTube proclaimed that Keir Starmer has caused a civil war. Clickbait headline by someone who knows nothing as usual. I think Elon Musk tweeted the same thing on his platform. He said there's going to be a civil war. Well, actually, a civil war requires an army and leadership. There is nothing like that in evidence. Starmer has used the mobilised public who attended recent protests to unveil what was already planned. Remember, this Labour Party have only been in a couple of weeks, and just look what's happened in that time. So this is not organic. All of this stuff has been planned. The Tories were enablers of the Global Action Plan, and this particular incarnation of what is called Labour are the enforcement team. The few riots caused mainly by agent provocateurs are just a useful driver. Therefore the public have once again been used to enforce what was already planned for them. To describe the disorganised clashes as a civil war is truly and utterly retarded. A civil war means to overthrow or attempt to overthrow a government system, monarch or leader, and no one is anywhere near doing that. And of course it's not even the Peasants' Revolt or the Parliament against Charles I. This is a media-steered chaos event for a predetermined goal, nothing more. Stop all opposition through legislation, legitimately, the way they see it, and under emergency powers. Remember that emergency powers, the use of crisis and emergency are very important with what is going on, because even the normal rule of law, of civil law, is suspended under emergencies, emergency powers. Remember that the World Health Organization declared a worldwide pandemic in 2009. So in 2020, when COVID actually was manufactured and put into place, it meant that emergency powers were already there worldwide, because the level 6 pandemic announced in 2009 under the bird flu scare, swine flu, was also put into place but never rescinded. And that means that the emergency powers were already in place. All this stuff is useful to know. So these idiot commentators with no knowledge are, however, useful to the system. They collectivise the gullible into mind viruses which actually neutralise any attempt at organisation. Well, this is why they are allowed, of course, and promoted by algorithms, which is the corporate side of it. So again, everything that you see in your news feeds, whether it's on what they call social media, Facebook or YouTube or any other platform, is there because it's been paid for. It's meant to be there. It is what advertisers want to put in front of the public. Therefore, anything that allows advertisers is going to be used and put up there. And this is where this fake alternative media has become so powerful, because they are now enabled by the state. The state's absorbed them. None of them are doing anything useful apart from talking about the two lies. And the people who aren't talking about the two lies you never hear of. Well, our shows, for instance, are getting more and more buried. It's very, very difficult now to get the website up, windowsontheworld.net. And because we're on Spreaker, that also seems to have disappeared, because we're getting off Spreaker and going on to Podbean as soon as possible. But, of course, this all costs money, and I want to get my money's worth out of Spreaker before I go over to Podbean. And the only thing that keeps this show going is the loyalty of the listeners, and because also it is a lifelong learning project, which I will continue to do until I spin off this mortal coil. So it's something I'll be doing for a lifetime. I'm not doing this as a career. I've never had a career. I never actually had one. I've just gone from doing what I want to other things, which have all been linked up, really. And that's the difference. This corporate fake alternative media and corporate mainstream media is all about corporations. And of course, let's talk now about these mouthpieces, such as those who appear at Tommy Robinson rallies. They have no goals or direction, which is, of course, why they're there. It was the usual day out at the Tommy protest, but it's now being used by agents to create a wider chaos. And comparisons have been made in the press, like I made earlier, to the 2011 riots, which started in Tottenham, of course, North London, and spread around the UK, of course, with a little help from nationwide agents. And this is actually true. I was able to observe the same kind of agent provocateurs at these riots. They were all in place and coordinating people on the ground. Of course, there was chaos as well, but it was running alongside something which was already planned. And this was, of course, to roll out these more military-type policing agendas and vehicles, which they now have at the ready. And the so-called far right have now become synonymous with international far-right Zionism. The highest governing aim of the most extreme hate-mongers in this collective group is, of course, to get Christians to be at war with Muslims. The Muslims are more united in Western countries, where, of course, they've been assimilated because of the West's wars on Iraq, Yemen, Africa, so on. The manipulators want this clash to happen. It is more than obvious, and the dupes over the last few days, as we have seen, have been falling for the cover story. Standing outside immigrant hotels and throwing stuff around is akin, of course, to having a dirty protest in your own bathroom. Putting yourself in the sights of a potential enemy is very dumb indeed. The real enemy, of course, are behind the curtain and manipulating it, and probably being very pleased with themselves at what is going on. Well, some have less to lose, of course, and everything to gain, and this has not been taken into proper consideration. Those who believe they are being invaded but have no plan of action are the cannon fodder needed to ignite this situation, and they are playing into the enemy's hands. This third power manipulating both sides is, of course, never mentioned, though. However, it does seem to be working to some extent. Tommy Robinson is sponsored, or in effect owned, by Middle East Monitor, a pro-Israel propaganda publication. This has happened since his bankruptcy, so he is now bought and paid for. Previously, he was with pro-Zionist Rebel News, who were his then employers, and Rebel Media were very helpful to Tommy when he was arrested in Canada. His documentaries, though, to be fair, have been very good. They have exposed the BBC and Hope Not Hate. And Silenced, the one that he played at this event about a week ago, lays out the real facts behind his bankruptcy. The press and judiciary perverted the course of justice. That is a fact. Well, if you don't believe it, and you don't believe me, just watch it. The evidence is all there. The press still say it's a lie, though, when, of course, witnesses to this Syrian boy being accosted by another pupil tell the real story and the real agenda behind the despicable propaganda that it was used for against the British public. And in this documentary, the head teacher and other staff were paid off because, of course, he filmed them secretly and they wanted to tell the truth. So it's all in that film. This lie of a refugee, which he wasn't, being attacked because of his race, which it wasn't, was a big lie. There was no racism involved at all. It was normal schoolyard reaction over one boy's vile behaviour, which had been noted by both pupils and the teachers who were featured in this documentary. A big propaganda lie used as a weapon against the public by subversives to demonise those, of course, who the state should be supporting. Now, bearing in mind there were hundreds of people watching that documentary, I hope that those people learned from that documentary, or at least watched it when they went home, because in a way it tells them everything they need to know, apart, of course, from the far-right Zionist influence which is going on behind the so-called far right. So the documentary tells how they were paid off and the incident used in this despicable way, and only the judiciary and media working together know how this is done. It happens all the time. This is what the public should be protesting about. The cover-ups and brazen lies which lead them into these inevitable traps. So if those who say they want their country back actually mean it, they have to get busy and start using their minds. Mindlessness will not work. Thinking and planning are the only ways to effect the C word. Yes, change. The inciting incident, this multiple murder in Southport, came within days of the Starmer regime coming to power, and no one knows whether this killer was handled or under some external influence, and will of course never know. We never know with these events. If people follow the likes of Tommy or Stephen, Yaxley Lennon, though, they are going nowhere, as there are no solutions forthcoming, and that is the issue. It all comes down to integrity and authenticity. When you mix some facts with being owned and steered, then it's over. So, how many people will start again? Let's look at some of the developments from the press, the steering mechanism of the corporations. It said, balaclava-clad baying mob storm migrant hotel, hurl chairs at riot police and set fire to furniture, while terrified asylum seekers watch on from rooms in latest violent riots. This is exactly what the media dupes have been stoking up for years, of course. A self-defeating act by turning up and doing this stuff, which will weaponise the immigrants and cause endless distraction once it has started. So what is being engineered is another major and dangerous distraction. Also, of course, with the jails being emptied, the new police being recruited will be literally a law unto themselves. Even now, of course, many of the police are unintelligent and exhibit criminal behaviour. I'm not saying this lightly. I've experienced it, I've seen it and had to deal with it. Many other people have too. Just check out how many police are convicted of crimes, and remember that most get away with it. So these are just the ones that are being made public. Most of them, of course, are supported by their own. And this, of course, is all part of the UN goals and aligned with government policy, that there should be these sort of clashes to keep the two lies governing the population. And this is what the new word community means. It means being governed by an external source. So this external source, which you're rallying against at the moment, is going to be in place to actually steer the mechanism of control in the future. So one has to see through this and get round it and start going from global to local. And let's carry on with what the Daily Mail Online says. It says tensions are high between anti-immigration demonstrators and police across the UK, with the past few days seeing officers attacked, cars set on fire and innocent pedestrians targeted in the street. Shocking photos from this afternoon show balaclava-clad rioters drinking beer as they formed a crowd outside the Holiday Inn in Rotherham, South Yorkshire, where asylum seekers and immigrants are housed. Well, this is a Holiday Inn, but who are the balaclava-clad rioters? Well, from the photos I've seen, they are agent provocateurs. The public are generally standing back, hurling a little bit of abuse, but it's these people who are goading them into serious violence. One person's face, it says, was completely covered with a Union Jack mask. Well, that'll be one of these paid for infiltrators. It says, while they waved a large England flag outside the hotel. Well, I got sent someone with two of them, two plants actually, who were getting the crowd going, with an England flag with the anarchy symbol on. The black anarchy symbol with the circle, which is a sign that the police use. The police always used this. They sprayed it on a building when they wanted their infiltrators to come in so they could shut down the protest and arrest people. It says, meanwhile, anti-racism counter-protesters have increased tensions for police by arriving at the scene holding up banners reading "Refugees Welcome, Stop the Far Right." Here we have the two lies in action. The disruption, it says, across England and Northern Ireland began on Tuesday in Southport after 3 little girls were killed in a knife attack. They always bring this up as well, at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. Why do they keep saying that? This is all part of it as well. It's all part of this popularisation of terminology. And so people get in their heads, this subconsciousness, into this pop culture, which is really being manipulated and used to get into people's heads. The two lies, right and left, are absorbing all the energy for the third-party controllers. After all this time, there is still no strategy. Well, let's now go to the UK Guardian. It's always a good source of corporate globalist propaganda. It says, a polarisation engine. How social media has created a perfect storm for UK's far-right riots. That headline actually reveals the plan behind the steering. A polarisation engine. Yes, that's technically what it is. It says algorithms that send the most outrageous comments viral, and a chain reaction of anger and disinformation made the riots that followed the Southport killings inevitable. Well, of course, these are the algorithms that are promoted. They want this to happen. So all of these idiots you see alongside Tommy Robinson, all of these sort of lovable, cheeky, chappy types, and people who may be from ethnic minorities who are being part of this fake right alternative, are all part of this. They're all part of the steered mechanism. They're part of the two lies, which is why they are corporate, which is why they are no good. Okay, why was it inevitable? Because it was always going to happen as it was being enabled. It says the resurgence of far-right violence in the UK is in part due to Elon Musk's decision to allow figures such as Tommy Robinson back on social media platform X. Researchers say. Researchers? Who? Well, they probably mean Hope Not Hate and the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, who are propagandists, not researchers. The research they put out in papers and the rubbish they supply the press is usually by university graduates who have been taught about extremism, especially in the case, of course, of the ISD, through creating ideas about the so-called far right. They produce these papers about these existential threats that aren't really in evidence and don't exist, because these people have been going through college and university and they've never actually infiltrated any of these organisations. They've never actually been round people who are radical and who are actually at the forefront of real terrorism. They know nothing about real terrorism. They've only been given the cover story as well, so they fall for the cover stories of 9/11, 7/7, etc. And then they get brainwashed into this media propaganda for corporate outlets. So these people from the Institute of Strategic Dialogue are merely corporate. They are nothing else. The so-called far right and state intelligence, which drive policy rather than any real extremism, that's all that's covered. So don't think any have actually done any real research or done anything in their entire lives. They just produce these papers. And when I saw the age of some of these people, some of them in their late 20s or early 30s, they've never done anything. They've just been at university, been told this stuff happens in a certain way, Western propaganda narrative, and never been taught the two sides to any story. Let's get back to what this says. It says Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, and those of his ilk are not leaders in the traditional sense, and the far right has no central organisation capable of directing the disorder and violence that has been seen, experts say. I mean, expert is the new word for absolute useful idiot globalist numpty, isn't it? Experts. Yeah, we've seen that, haven't we? We've seen experts for years and years and years. Well, you don't need an expert to see this, but they don't mention the agents, of course, who are stirring things up as usual. It says Jacob Davey, Director of Policy and Research at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, said, people have been naming the EDL, the English Defence League, as key figures when the EDL actually has ceased to function as a movement. Yes, of course, but there was no other organisation they could use, so that one will do, as Tommy was, of course, once its leader. The UK, like other parts of the world, now has a much more decentralised extreme right movement, said the useful idiot. No, it doesn't. It has a lot of frustrated and annoyed people who are being driven to focus on the wrong targets. The likes of ISD and Hope Not Hate through the media seek to demonise that potential resistance, which is as low as it actually gets. Under any other circumstances, it would be called treachery or high treason or something like that. Of course, we don't really live in a monarchy anymore. We live in a corporatocracy. So that doesn't count. Let's see what else it says. It says there have been known figureheads at protests, including some avowed neo-Nazis. But there's also this loose network that includes concerned local citizens and football hooligans. Well, known figureheads at protests, like who? Any names? They just say there is no organisation, and they love naming names, so why don't they name some names? Because they haven't got any names. See how they insert local citizens here as well, because they know that the troublemakers are what they need to create the fakery. They have to drag ordinary people into the far right. The decentralised nature, it says, of far right activity, which Mulhall described, this is Joe Mulhall of Hope Not Hate, described as post-organisational. So he describes it as post-organisational. Makes it much harder to police and track, he said. Well, so in other words, even hardened far-left MI5 state propagandists know there is no organised movement and no people leading it. They usually make up groups who are so ridiculous that they don't even properly exist. So they've even run out of ideas on that front. If you want to have a good laugh, read their State of Hate. I think they even had Richie Allen in there a couple of years ago. So sign up to the Institute of Strategic Dialogue Insights and check out the Hope Not Hate website for some useful information on how idiots control the media. It says, we've been spending 24 hours a day for the last week attempting to dig down and find out who is organising these events, said Joe Mulhall of Hope Not Hate. And what you find is that someone sets up a Telegram channel saying something like, Nottingham Rising will be here at 3 p.m. on Saturday, and no one has any idea who it is. Well, those Telegram groups are steered and appear to play into the hands of the government system. People spend half their lives on there being monitored and joining purposeless groups who achieve nothing. Except, of course, getting surveilled and being infiltrated by operatives. It says all these people are tied together by these loose online networks activated by deeply cynical influences. Well, of course they are. They're activated and used by the very cynical influences which control the output of Hope Not Hate. And he says many are outside this country and galvanised by viral online disinformation from unknown and untrustworthy sources. So here they say outside the country. Now this one has been used to say that Russia is involved, which is comedy. The Institute for Strategic Dialogue and the, I think now defunct, Absurd Integrity Initiative, I think that Chris Williamson, the MP, actually exposed, this was a few years ago, was blaming Russia for just about every tweet. which they didn't like at one point. Intelligence does not function at such a low level. It is state-backed third parties which are doing this. So you can't say that Russian propaganda would operate at such an absurd level. This is what they call British intelligence. And this means, of course, that if the public did get organised and at a local level, getting into being councillors and getting elected locally, then something could be done. But of course, this is not being allowed to happen. I mean, I went to one of these meetings in London, and now they've caught on to this idea that people might want to get into local policy. So the new agents steering these groups are saying that they work in local planning, and they're sort of rebelling against it. It's absolutely absurd. And of course, it's always been absurd. It doesn't have to be sensible, because people just go along with it without questioning anything. So, in summary, authenticity is the only solution. Rent-a-mob are in control, or so they think. Only organisation through planning and with intolerance to infiltration will work. At the moment, it's all going in the planned direction, and the public are willing dupes in their own captivity. This, of course, is a great challenge and a test of real integrity. And I know the people who listen to this show have that integrity. So I hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was useful. Stay in touch through the website. Do support us. We are being forced into the margins. We always have been, of course, but things will not get any better. So do support the show if you can. Keep in touch. info@windowsontheworld.net, and do remember to join us every Sunday 8 p.m. on the live shows page at windowsontheworld.net.